wondering, Rage, what is this video? What is this about? So I did some thinking after going through the Aaron Barron's incident and having seen a few comments made by other parents on the internet in regards to furries. So I wanted to make a video you could show your mom. Basically, show your mom, your dad, maybe your legal guardian if you are not living with your mom or dad, that kind of explains furries in a way that makes them less scary, so that if it's something that you're afraid to tell your family about, you can just show them this video and just have a nice primer before you get into the whole, hey guys, I'm a furry bit. Please feel free to leave me some feedback on this. This is meant as a nice little educational bit for anyone who maybe isn't familiar with the community and maybe has only been introduced to it through some of the more negative articles produced by different news stations. A great person to look at for this is Aberguine. She does amazing coverage of that kind of thing. I'll link her down in the description. But if that's the only exposure they've had and they've never actually met a real-life furry, I'd love to be that first furry that gives them a quick handle on what the culture is. I may not be the most qualified, but you know what? I'm willing to take a stab. So, dear parents, here's some things you should know about furries, and kids, if you're at home, this is where you're gonna wanna, skip the video for mom or dad. Okay, so why is your kid telling you that he or she is furry? Well, there could be a couple of reasons for that. Either they've discovered the online community for furries, they've discovered that furries are a thing, which sometimes happens earlier or later in life, or maybe they've just always known and they're afraid to tell you, but now they feel okay to tell you. But why are furries a thing? So if you've seen any of my other videos, although if you're a parent, you probably haven't, because it's probably not going to come up in recommended, a lot of furries discover their interest in the furry fandom through media, things that they consume, movies, books, a lot of cartoons usually, video games, maybe webcomics, maybe just random exposure, maybe going to your local game and the mascot to them has an interesting color scheme and design, and in their head they're thinking of really cool backstories that could have led it to be those colors. It could be literally anything. Just like you or I might be very interested in Star Wars or anime or Star Trek, or even like cooking shows, like watching Mario Batali or Emerald when maybe you were younger. Furries develop their interest usually through media consumption, and usually through things that speak to them and have a strong interest for them. Although not all furries start this way, you may grow up watching SWAT Cats, Thundercats, any of those old school shows and not really feel anything and think it's just a kid's show and eventually put it aside, but some furries never do. Even though these are considered childish things, not every furry lets go of that sort of thing. Imagine that one friend you have that's still really into Disney princesses. While Disney princesses are a thing of childhood, they might not have let go because it's something that speaks to them in a very strong way, and depending on how they were raised, where they were raised, or the situations of how they grew up, they might cling to it as something that's comfortable, they recognize, and they feel okay with, and never really let go of the interest in. A lot of furries are the same way. While the media would lead you to believe that furries are a scary subculture that has a lot of a dark side to it, no, you really shouldn't be worried if your kid tells you that they're furry. And here's why. While it's absolutely true that there are definitely furries in our community that are a bit unsavory and engage in some less than appropriate activities, not all furries are like this. On average, most furries you meet are not necessarily going to have an interest in that sexual side, and if your child is under the age of 18, typically most conventions that you go to will do their best to keep anything inappropriate for your child out of their view. Now, of course, with anything like porn or, well, porn If your kid really wants to find it, they're probably going to find a way, but it's not any better or worse than any other fandom out there. Just like there are creeps in Star Trek communities and anime communities and brony communities, oh god, brony communities, and the Sonic fandom, there's going to be creeps in the furry community, but if you teach your kid how to explore safe web searching and, really good safety on the internet, you should be fine. If an issue does arise, you can easily talk it out with your child, but just know that most furries they're going to be encountering on the internet are most likely going to be artists and not scary people. So, this is a question I actually get a lot as a furry. What do furries do? So, most furries are creative people, so a lot of us draw, a lot of us sing, and a lot of us create content either on YouTube or through other mediums. We like to create stuff, we're creative people. We create our own persona, sometimes, not always, and we create fursuits or buy them from people, sometimes, but not always. But other than that, furries just do everything normal people do. We go to the store, we go to work, and we live our lives pretty normally, apart from maybe ears or a tail if that's what we're into, or just reading great content that other furries make, or watching great content that other furries make, or just consuming furry content. Some of us are really into Lion King and we watch that a whole bunch, and some of us are really, really into Paw Patrol. Like, really into Paw Patrol, and we watch that. But other than that, furries don't really do anything differently than the rest of us. And those that do fursuit really just do it for fun. There isn't really anything exclusive to our community that we do other than just exist, and your child probably is going to be drawing and reading cool short stories and maybe telling you about their favorite fursuit. Maybe it's mine, probably isn't though, and just kind of going to school and being a normal kid. So furries just do normal stuff. So you might have heard me mention the term fursuit. What is a fursuit? So a fursuit is typically a big fluffy outfit that is representative of a character either that your child may have created or that they bought in an auction. Fursuits are a really fun way to express your character in public. Although some places aren't as friendly, where I live in New York, you can't really go out in fursuit, which is kind of a downer. But other than that, a fursuit is kind of like a mascot suit, just a bit more detailed, usually made more carefully, and with nicer materials. Fursuits aren't really that bad. There are definitely variations on fursuits that can get a little bit inappropriate, but typically fursuits are just a fun, furry suit that you can wear around and express yourself in. And if your child is asking about a fursuit, here are some tips and tricks. If your child is pretty small and younger in age, they might be talking about a full suit, which is a head-to-toe furry outfit. And while these are great, super cute, and really fun, if you're on the smaller side or the younger side and you haven't finished developing yet, it might be best to wait before you purchase one of these because you're still growing and developing. So if your kid is talking about fursuits, expresses an interest in fursuits, also know that most makers won't make fursuits for people under the age of 18. So it isn't really recommended that they get a full suit until they are over the age of 18. Another really great way to get around this issue is have your kid make their own fursuit. It's probably not going to go great the first couple of times because they're not the easiest thing to make, but because some makers are a little gun shy on giving fursuits to younger kids, it's a great way for them to be creative and, kind of explore a creative outlet for something that they just told you they're really into. Now, if you do want to help them in the process of buying a fursuit, just be aware that most people that they'll want to commission might be a little bit hesitant to do so. So if that's something that you want to help your kid pursue, just make sure you talk to whoever maker they want to work with. Make sure it's okay and, really assure the person who is creating the suit that you are okay with paying for it. Make sure you read all of the terms and conditions because many of these makers are small businesses and this is how they support themselves. So just be understanding, patient, and just know that fursuits are really no big deal. They're just fun, furry outfits, and your kid might really like them. Now, where before in the furry community you really only saw people at conventions, initially this was Star Trek conventions and other comics conventions, the internet has played a really big role in connecting furries in that you can make all kinds of friends on the internet who like the same thing as you, and this has also carried over into furries. Some big sites that your child may mention are Fur Affinity, Furry Amino, and then also the usuals: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, maybe even DeviantArt. Depending on where your child is interacting with furries, there's some things to keep in mind. Sites like Fur Affinity do have safe filters so that if your child is under the age of 18, they can filter out the no-no stuff from their regular feed, and sites like Furry Amino explicitly ban things that are sexually explicit or not appropriate. Now, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, not entirely. While Facebook does a pretty good job of filtering out the less than savory things for your child, Twitter doesn't really, and Instagram is kind of a crapshoot. Now, depending on where your child's engaging, you can keep a pretty close eye on the things they consume pretty decently, but if you're worried, it's not the worst idea in the world to put some parental controls on the computer until they're of age, or just have a really thoughtful discussion with your child about what they're consuming, because admittedly, it's out there, but thankfully on most furry sites, it's a little harder to find than you may think. So these online communities are pretty great in that respect. There's also Telegram, which is a communication service, which, if your child has Telegram, just know that that one is a little bit harder to keep an eye on, so maybe tell your child to wait before they get a Telegram account because there aren't as many safety features built in, and it may not be the most secure place for them to engage with other furries. Now, the online community is mostly art-based, so most of what your child will probably be telling you about is art, animation, some YouTube, and a lot of furries love to do comics, stories, and make adoptables. Adoptables are great if your kid doesn't really have a fursona, which is a furry personality that they feel represents themselves, and they may go to adopt a character from an artist online. Just make sure if they do any of this, again, with most people, underage people have a bit of a harder time because a lot of artists are a little gun-shy on selling things to underage users because typically they aren't making their own income and they may have to use your credit card or your PayPal account to pay for it, and let's just say there have been a few instances of kids taking their mom's credit card or PayPal to pay for things. But if they want to do this and they want to use your account, just make sure you talk to them about it, supervise as much as you can, and just understand that, like any community on the internet, you just have to be a little bit more careful. But it's not any better or worse than other communities. Now, inevitably, your kid is going to ask about furry conventions and if they can attend. So, a few words on furry conventions. There's a whole bunch that are available. There are small local ones, there are big, huge ones, but there are also fur meets, which are usually locally conducted, and just basic meetups. Some common ones that tend to happen are a bunch of furries going bowling, a bunch of furries going to, say, like a Dave & Buster's or a Chuck E. Cheese, or just going to the park to enjoy some fresh air and maybe some neon fur. There's nothing wrong with it, and it's actually a pretty great way to socialize and meet other people that have the same interests as you, but conventions can be a little scary the first time, so I wouldn't advise any child to go alone. In fact, most recommend that if you're under the age of 18, you have to go with a parent or guardian, which is a great way for you to also meet our community in all their weird, wonderful glory. Now, if you've never gone to a convention before, I would advise you go for something smaller as a first try. Myself personally, I went to my first convention when I was 26. So I was a lot older. I've been to major music festivals, so I'm kind of used to crowded situations, loud music, people I don't know, scary situations, that sort of thing. But fur conventions are a good deal safer. You'll notice from the get-go that there's probably more guys there than there are women, and you'll probably notice that a lot of the community tends to veer on the older side. The reason for this is some parents don't feel okay letting their kids go to these until they're a bit older and wiser, but if you want to experience a convention with your child, go for it. Absolutely sign up for the panels, go learn something about our community, and just have a great time with your child learning about what they're really into. I find that these can be great bonding experiences for parents and kids. Just make sure when you're looking at different things to take your kid to that they're okay for their age. There are some panels that aren't going to be, and that's okay, but just make sure anything you take your child to is age appropriate. There's also really great initiatives at these places, such as dance competitions, artist alleys, floor wars, which I guess is also dance competitions, talent shows, there's great stand-up performances, and there's really useful information there. But again, make sure it's age appropriate. Not every stand-up routine is okay for children's ears, but furry conventions are just great places to go meet other people. Some really big ones include Midwest Fur Fest, which is held in Rosemont, Illinois, and Anthrocon, which is held in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. These might be intimidating because they're very, very big. So if you want to take your child to a convention, maybe go for something local, a little bit smaller, and just a little bit closer to home, just so that you can get that sense of how a convention works and how everything comes together before you commit to a full-blown several thousand person convention, because that can be a little bit scary. Now, just like any other fandom out there are a whole bunch of other communities that also exist within the furry community. One of the first things you're probably going to notice is we tend to index very, very high on the LGBT community scale. There are quite a few furries in the fandom who are openly gay, bisexual, transgender, non-binary, or really anything in that general variety. You'll also hear a lot of accusations about all furries being autistic, and while we certainly over-index in people who are on the autistic scale, not every furry you're going to bump into necessarily has autism. Again, just to quickly call it out, but Gnoggin has a great piece on furries that also explores this a bit. I will link it below because it is very, very useful. So when you go to any of our public outings, look at our stuff online, or just go to a convention, you're probably going to notice right off the bat that there are a whole bunch of furries that don't just identify as furry, but also gay, or lesbian, or transgender, or any number of things, and that's totally cool. If you're not okay with any of those concepts, just be aware that that's pretty prevalent in our community, and your kid might not necessarily veer into one of those buckets. But if you are going to attend any of our public events, that open homophobia is not usually accepted, tolerated, or encouraged at any of our public events or online. So if it's not something you necessarily agree with, it might be a good time to talk to your child about some of the things that are present at those. And if they're not okay with it either, in-person furry community events may not be the thing for you. But again, if that's something that you're okay with, just be aware that it exists. But just because your kid is into the furries and is a member of the furry community doesn't exactly mean that they're going to turn up gay or transgender, but don't be surprised if a bunch of their friends are. And I think to myself, still got questions? Still a little concerned? That's completely normal. So if you still have any remaining questions on furries, the community, or what it means for your child, just know that I'm always open to questions, and I will happily answer any questions or concerns that you may have about your child being a member of the furry community. If you want to send me a question, I'm going to put my email right up here on the screen, so you can go ahead and send any questions or concerns. Just as a quick note, although I shouldn't have to tell you, you're a parent, please don't use my inbox as a way to, oh, how do I put this politely? Be really mean and send me hateful spew about how furries are bad and should go to hell because A, I'm not super religious, so I don't really believe in hell, and B, that's not really a good use of either of our times. So, if you still have questions, just feel free to ask. I am happy to answer any question you may have or that your child has about the community, furries in general, fursuits, really anything. So, feel free to use me as a lifeline if you still feel a little lost and confused. So if you're wondering why your kid showed you this video, they probably have seen my other videos where I talk about furry topics, things in pop culture that relate to the anthropomorphic or furry community, either as Cupcake or as Helly, my other fursona whose head is a bit damaged at the moment. I like to use these videos to educate the community on different topics, which are not necessarily always specifically furry. I have a great episode on rewriting resumes, interviewing for a job, handling small business. I don't just stick to furry stuff. So if you got driven here by your kid, that means your kid probably has a great taste in YouTube content. But if you yourself are ever interested in watching my other videos that cover a whole wealth of topics, be it furry or not, you're always welcome to join. I also do light shows and flow arts, which is a special type of art where you use lighted things to make pretty patterns, which is pretty prevalent in the rave community. In addition to that, I also teach a couple little courses on how to do gloving, which you can see here, and some of the more advanced tips and tricks that your kid might use to do their own light shows or do their own performances. Now, I hope this has been really helpful, and pretty much, I hope you've learned a few things from this.
Hey, until the next video, I'll see ya.